partidul s-a născut.
Ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Словом, никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
марш, левый, два, три, встать, ряды, товарищ, на! Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как все мы люди, то должны мы, извините, что-то есть. Хотят накормить нас пустой болтовней, чертям спасибо за честь. Марш, левый, два, три, марш, левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ, на! Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. И так как ты рабочий, то не жди, что нам поможет другой. Себе мы свободу добудем твою своей рабочей рукой. Марш, левый, два, три, марш, левый, два, три, встать ряды, товарищ, на! Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Modern Platz in das ist. Rege ein in der Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Ты войдешь в наш единый рабочий фронт, потому что рабочий ты сам. Rege ein in der Arbeitereinheitsfront, weil du auch ein
Небо утреннего стяг, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь.
Greetings, everybody. Excuse me, and welcome. You'll have to pardon the occasional cough from me this evening because it is the case that I am recovering from a bout of some sort of virus that has left me gargling with phlegm more often than an enthusiastic pipe smoker. So, here we are today with a live stream talking about the United Front Against Fascism and its historical application and its current status. So we will come to the various points that have been raised in the chat about Jim Jones and other interesting characters in just a moment. But first, we must, of course, be sure to remind you all to like and share this stream if you haven't done so already. We are live on Facebook, Rumble, X, Twitch, and YouTube. So subscribe to all those various channels, follow us on X, share it across the platforms, maybe share it on some Facebook groups frequented by elderly relatives. That always goes down well. Now, we will turn first of all to the question of, well, what is fascism? Because the term gets applied far too liberally. We've discussed this many times before. Now, there are, of course, common features we can draw out of different fascist regimes. It's not always the case that the fascist regime has to look like the Austrian watercolor artist and his gang of brown-shirted, short-wearing madmen, but often it is the case that that's what they look like. But the actual content of a fascist regime has to be studied properly. And what we mean by the actual content, just to answer Daniel's question in the chat, the flag behind my shoulder there is the Starry Plough, flag of Irish socialist republicanism, flown by the great Irish revolutionary James Connolly and the Citizen Army at one stage. That is a version of it you can see on the wall behind me. Now, to return to the question of fascism, first of all, are we in fascism in Britain and America right now, or France or Germany? The answer is no, but that doesn't diminish the level of repression or the level of bureaucratic rule or the level of extreme racism and chauvinism that is present in these societies. You see, one of the problems that we're going to be discussing tonight is the persistent ascribing of racism, authoritarianism, dictatorial methods, bureaucratic rule, militarism, the ascribing of all of those things by leftists to just being fascism, whereas in actual fact, they are all symptoms of capitalist rule. More specifically, given that we are coming to you from the imperial core, more specifically, they are features of the imperialist stage of capitalism. They are features of late stage decaying monopoly capitalism, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the system has gone full fascist if all of those things are present. You don't need to have the Austrian watercolor artist or his numerous wannabe successors who you can find running YouTube channels or Rumble channels these days to have a regime that is based on dictatorial rule and extreme chauvinism and extreme violence and support for genocide or active participation in the genocide. Do I consider the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, to be fascist? Asks President Jesus in the chat. At this stage, I do not. There are, of course, individual fascists within their ranks, just as there are individual fascists within the ranks of the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, as there are individual fascists inside the party of Emmanuel Macron or the British Conservative Party or the Reform Party. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the organization itself is fascist, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we are in fascism right now. So let's just get to the point about what is fascism. Fascism is the emergency form of rule of the bourgeoisie, and we're going to be referring here to the imperialist countries. fascist movements in non-imperialist countries take different forms. So we're going to be discussing here the imperialist countries first and foremost. So fascism in the imperialist nations is a form of emergency rule that is imposed by the imperialist bourgeoisie for the specific purposes of completely destroying or attempting to completely destroy the capacity of the working class to challenge for power. That's the reason why fascists are brought in. And they are brought in to destroy working class organizations, to destroy principally and firstly the Communist Party in any given country, to completely smash after that all working class capacity for resistance against the rule of capital. So all forms of trade unionism, all forms of working class self-organization, including right down to working class cultural organizations, all forms of working class political and social organizations are destroyed. And they are replaced by fascist-run organizations such as Mussolini's syndicates or Hitler's various different German organizations such as the German Labor Front. And the purpose to doing all of this is to first of all remove the threat to the rule of the imperialist bourgeoisie by the organized working class led by the Communist Party, and secondly then to restore profitability by removing all barriers to capitalist exploitation of labor domestically speaking. So the trade unions being one such barrier, the Communist Party being one such barrier, even social democratic parties being one such barrier. Now, once those have been removed, then the most vicious regime of exploitation is imposed upon the domestic working class, be that in the United States, Britain, wherever. That would be the case if a fascist regime was to come into power today. That was what they would do. They would try and put back in place the most vicious regime of exploitation of the labor of the domestic working class to urgently restore profitability to a flagging and failing capitalist economy. Now, as Dmitrov Palme Dutt pointed out in his book, Fascism and Social Revolution, this is an attempt to not only restore profitability, but to also, as Hitler himself stated on many occasions, but to literally use the brute force of the state to try and do away with class contradictions, to declare them to be irrelevant. And they do away with them by literally trying to repress them out of existence, by trying to repress their manifestations. It's also the case that fascism as a tendency, as a political tendency of the bourgeoisie, which is what it is, only comes about really in the age of imperialism. And it comes about in the age of imperialism principally after World War I, because it is, dialectically speaking, the response of the bourgeoisie to the proletarian revolution. The proletarian revolution seems to the bourgeoisie, and again, one can understand this class's point of view with regard to this, the bourgeoisie sees in Bolshevism, to draw on Lenin's phrase, was a dire, very real threat to the very existence of the bourgeois class and the capitalist mode of production. So they had to conjure something up that would counter that. And it was revealed in the struggle against Bolshevism and against the Russian Revolution and against the early Soviet Union, that simply using the methods of old-fashioned bourgeois dictatorship or trying to lean on the old feudal reactionaries wasn't going to cut it anymore. They needed something else. They needed something else that could appear to be revolutionary, because in the aftermath of World War I, what you had was a huge number of demobilized soldiers in the middle of like an economic crisis, who were becoming impoverished and enraged, and who, in slightly different circumstances, might have been in the front line of those who would be recruited to a communist party. Now, the bourgeoisie hired a capable agitator in Italy in the form of Benito Mussolini, former senior member of the Italian Socialist Party, former editor of the Italian socialist newspaper Avanti, and they got, and along with, of course, British intelligence intervening on Mussolini's behalf, they created the Italian Fascist Party. And the purpose of this party was to do two things. One, to provide a paramilitary force that would be completely reliable for the bourgeoisie. Because in a time of crisis, such as that which was facing Italy after 1918, and Germany after 1928 to 29, they, that is the bourgeoisie, felt that they could no longer properly rely upon the state forces. They needed something more. They needed to supplement those with paramilitary street forces that would be capable of delivering extreme violence to the militant working class to smash up strikes, etc. That's what Mussolini was hired to do. It's what the Hitlerites were hired to do. It's what any fascist movement in the United States, Britain, or any other imperialist country would be hired to do in the near future. They're not required at the moment because the level of militancy of the working class is nowhere near high enough to merit the deployment of fascist squads on the streets. Now, we may get to that point quite soon, but it's not there just yet. So the fascist movements that emerge in the 20s and the 30s are brought into power, and because they emerge at a time of revolution, they emerge at a time in the post-October world, the post-October Revolution world, the world in which there is a living example of a workers' state. Therefore, because you live in a time of revolution, we still do live in the time of revolution and counter-revolution to this day. There's no undoing the October Revolution, no matter how hard they try. Even Putin and the Russian liberals have found they can't undo it. But because that happened, as I said, bourgeois reaction had to change. Couldn't rely on the old method anymore. You couldn't just install a colonel and call him a figure of national salvation. They try that in other places, in South America, for instance. But in countries where there was a strong proletariat, you needed to do something different. The bourgeoisie themselves needed a mass movement, or at least the appearance of one that could ape or adopt parodies of communism, parodies of communist slogans, parodies of communist activity, parodies of communist forms of organization that would act as an attractive force for dispossessed petty bourgeois and lumpen elements who could then be mobilized against the working class. And the idea being that the fascists, as they said themselves, were leading some form of national revolution, which is what Hitler often claimed to be leading, is what Mussolini often claimed to be leading. But in actual fact, both men were mere servants of monopoly capitalism. They were just dressing up their repression of the domestic working class in grandiose language of a national renewal, a national revolution, national socialism. And you need to do that because you need to counter the mass appeal of communism by having basically a fake bourgeois version of it, which is what fascism ultimately is. It's the dialectical response to the October Revolution, is to produce a form of bourgeois politics which is essentially attempting to negate Bolshevism using ultra-violent and brutal methods. Fascism is everything that the bourgeois say that Bolshevism is. Fascism is violent from the off, destructive, it is terroristic, it is brutal, and it is designed to smash up and destroy all independent forms of working class organization. That is the essence of fascism. And when it is brought into power, its mass base of impoverished petty bourgeois and knuckle-dragging lumpens is put to work essentially running around permanently carrying out terror operations against any source of opposition. But when it's brought into power, it generally retreats into being a more extravagant and elaborate version of a sort of military police style dictatorship. So that is what fascism essentially is. It is the most violent, organized and well-funded form of anti-communism that is deployed when the bourgeoisie feel like they are in a corner and have no other alternative left. They don't need a mass fascist movement right now. But they are very careful to keep various different forms of fascist organization ticking over, and to keep fascist agitators ready to go, knowing that the chaos that just a small number of these can cause. Which leads us to the point about the United Front against fascism. The whole purpose of the United Front against fascism was to try and mobilize the entire working class, and sweep up along with that any support that could be gained from the petty bourgeoisie, unite the fractured forces of the working class against the fascist menace, as Dmitrov pointed out. And to do that, you need to be able to mobilize the working class around common sets of demands. So I'm just going to read a little from Dmitrov's work, if you will bear with me for just one moment, in order that we can understand a little bit more about what the United Front is and what the United Front isn't. So just bear with me a moment. Be sure to put your questions in the chat so we can get to those in just a moment, and then we will pick those up as we go along. Right, so I'm just going to read this. This is from page 38 of Dmitrov's work on fascism, and it's chapter 2 or point 2, United Front of the Working Class Against Fascism. So how can, Dmitrov says, fascism be prevented from coming to power, and how can fascism be overthrown after it has been victorious? To this, the Communist International replies, the first thing that must be done, the thing with which to begin, is to form a united front, to establish unity of action of the workers in every factory, in every district, in every region, in every country all over the world. Unity of action of the proletariat on a national and international scale is the mighty weapon which renders the working class capable not only of successful defense, but also successful counterattack against fascism, against the class enemy. Importance of the United Front. It is not clear that joint action by supporters of the parties and organizations of the two internationals, the Communist and the Second International, would make it easier for the masses to repulse the fascist onslaught and would heighten the political importance of the working class. Joint action by the parties of both internationals, that's the Second and Third Internationals, would not be confined to its effects to influencing their present adherents, the Communists and the Social Democrats. It would also exert a powerful influence on the ranks of the Catholic, anarchist, and unorganized workers, even upon those who had temporarily become the victims of fascist demagoguery. Moreover, powerful united front of the proletariat would exert tremendous influence on all other strata of the working people, on the peasantry, on the urban petty bourgeoisie, on the intelligentsia. A united front would inspire the wavering groups with faith in the strength of the working class. But even this is not all. The proletariat of the imperialist countries has possible allies not only in the toilers of its own countries, but also in the oppressed nations of the colonies and semi-colonies. Inasmuch as the proletariat is split with both nationally and internationally, inasmuch as one of its parts supports the policy of collaboration with the bourgeoisie, in particular its system of oppression in the colonies and semi-colonies, a barrier is put between the working class and the oppressed peoples of the colonies and semi-colonies, and the world anti-imperialist front is weakened. Every step on the road to unity of action is in the direction of supporting the people of for the liberation of the colonial peoples by the proletariat of the imperialist countries, means transforming the colonies and semi-colonies into one of the most important reserves of the world proletariat. If, finally, we bear in mind that international unity of action by the proletariat relies on the steadily growing strength of the proletarian state, the land of socialism, the Soviet Union, we see what broad perspectives are revealed by the realization of proletarian unity of action on a national and an international scale. The establishment of unity of action by all sections of the working class, irrespective of the party or organization to which they belong, is necessary even before the majority of the working class is united in the struggle for the overthrowing of capitalism and the victory of the proletarian revolution. Is it possible to realize this unity of action of the proletariat in individual countries and throughout the world? Yes, it is. And is it possible at this very moment? The Communist International puts no conditions for unity of action except one, that an elementary condition acceptable for all workers, that viz. That the unity of action be directed against fascism, against the offensive of capital, against the threat of war, against the class enemy. This is our condition. So what Dmitrov is talking about here is the unification of working class forces. That's why he's talking about the unification of those who were still adherents to the old Second International, because at the time that he was writing that, the early 1930s, the parties of the Second International, especially in Europe, still had many, many millions of workers who were adherents of them. So what does this mean in terms of today? Now, back in when that was written, Dmitrov also talks about a common program of action around which anti-fascist groups should be built. And this is a very important thing, because you need both a positive program to draw in and unify the working class against fascism, and not just a negative one of saying, oh, look at them over there, they're racists, which is what most so-called anti-fascism amounts to these days. And so that's what the Communist International strove to build in the 1930s. And one of the other points that Dmitrov makes in that work is that although it might be necessary to engage with workers who are supporters of the Second International parties, like the Social Democrats in Germany, like the French Socialists, or even the British Labour Party back in the 1930s, that the communists must retain complete freedom of agitation and action to continue to educate workers as to the full realities of where fascism comes from, that it springs forth from the bourgeoisie, and also, as Dmitrov implies there in the mention of the colonized peoples, that that imperialism itself is being the root of fascism, or one of the root causes of fascism, also has to be clearly identified. So communists must retain freedom of action and agitation outside of the confines of the United Front to make those points. One of the problems that we've had since, really, I would argue, the 1950s is that too often communist parties have actually bound themselves hand and foot to the representatives of the Second International, or things even worse than them, and I'm thinking of the Democrats in the United States, and refuse to actually criticize them, and refuse to actually do any independent organization, and just say that the communists should support the things like the Democrats and the Labour Party, and not do any real independent organizing, and not deliver any real critique of these parties and organizations. So all the key parts of the truly dialectical nature of Dmitrov's work gets left out, basically, is what I'm saying there. So the other point to make here is that we should bring this up to the modern period. So, as I've already stated, we're not in fascism right at this moment in time. The bourgeoisie doesn't need it at this moment in time, even though many of them are flirting with it because of the nature of the crisis. They don't feel the need to go there just yet. They have demonstrated their ability to squash resistance that has remained divided and weak by just employing the means available to them through the sorry about that, by employing the means available to them through the existing mechanisms of the bourgeois state. As you can see, the cough is still very much lingering around. So there's no need for them to use fascism right at this moment in time. But they always keep a few of them around just in case they need to mobilize in a rapid fashion. So where are things standing at this moment in time with regard to anti-fascist organization? Now, I can speak mainly from experience in old perfidious Albion, I've run into, and in fact worked alongside at various different points, people who are in supposedly anti-fascist organizations. When I was first politically active over 25 years ago now, it was an organization called the Anti-Nazi League, which had its origins in the late 1970s. This was succeeded by the organization called UAF, Unite Against Fascism. This withered away and was replaced by another bureaucratically created institution called Stand Up to Racism. You see, at each stage, the actual political content, even of the name, got diluted. So now, where do things stand today in Britain with regard to anti-fascism? Well, the way in which these supposed anti-fascist organizations have worked over the last 30 to 40 years in Britain is that they essentially shackle working class action to the upper end of the trade union bureaucracy and the Labour Party. In fact, all they really do is to get out onto the streets whenever there's some kind of right-wing organization standing for election or having some kind of march, make a lot of noise, scream no to racism very loudly, and go home again. In fact, most of their gatherings seem to be pre-approved by the cops. They are there with the agreement of the state forces, and then the right-wingers, who are also, of course, heavily infiltrated or completely controlled by the state, also assemble at another point known to the police in advance, make lots of noise, and then go home again. It is performance, mainly. It's not that there isn't a growing problem with racism. It's not that the bourgeoisie aren't encouraging all kinds of divisions within the working class. It's just that the supposedly anti-racist organizations are compromised to the point where they can't really do anything meaningful about this, other than point and shout racist at people. And of course, there is, as somebody points out in the comments, a very dodgy association that Stand Up to Racism have, which is that they are prepared to work with Zionists and run cover for fake anti-Semitism scare stories. Look it up if you don't believe me. Now, this, of course, leads us to the question of, like, well, how should racist and reactionary groups be counteracted these days? Well, you can't counteract the symptoms of something unless you're going to actually go after the root cause. The root cause of racism, or I should more accurately say racialism, and division within the working class in Britain or in the United States, lies within these countries' actual reality, which is as with them as imperialist powers. That's the root of the systems of racialism that exist in both of these countries and in all the other imperialist countries too: France, Germany, Italy, the most of Western Europe. And unless you're going to address that, then you're not really doing anything. What most of the so-called anti-fascist organizations do now is they raise questions of aesthetics. That's it. They raise questions of, or they scream about Nigel Farage or Donald Trump being, shall we say, less than polite in their racism. What they do is scream about how Farage is a racist, which, given the man's record, is undoubtedly true. He has engaged in racialist rhetoric over the years and continues to do so. But, and this must be pointed out, what Nigel Farage says today, Keir Starmer says, well, about 3 seconds after Nigel Farage has finished saying it. It was the same 20 years ago with the British National Party. They were more of a classic fascist organization. That's where a lot of their leadership came from, the old National Front, which was a fascist revival organization in Britain in the 70s. And they took a decisively anti-immigrant position. But every time they did that, this, of course, trickled on through the bourgeois political system. So with the rise of the BNP in the early 2000s, so over 20 years ago, you got the Unite Against Fascism, as they were called then, going around saying that the big thing to do is to keep the Nazis out. Okay, so to do that, they would call for working class people to vote for a Labour Party, which not only had repeatedly betrayed them and left them objectively poorer every single time they got into government, but also the politicians who had endorsed the Iraq War and other wars just as bad as that, Libya, Syria, etc., that they should be favored with the votes of the working class over the Nazis, despite the fact that the death toll and the amount in terms of the oppressed peoples of the world and the amount of racialism that the Labour Party has generated and exploited over the years, over the decades, is far more than any British fascist organization could have achieved. And yet, supposedly anti-fascist organizations platform politicians from the Labour Party, which has always been a deeply, deeply racist party, deeply racialist party, and has called upon workers to vote for the Labour Party, or sometimes the Liberals, who are even worse, or sometimes even the Tories, to keep the BNP on whatever outfit Nigel Farage is running at the time out of office. So this isn't about anti-fascism anymore. No matter what name is put on these supposedly anti-fascist organizations, what is being done here is a policing of bourgeois politics by essentially a series of state-run organizations, which is what the Anti-Nazi League became. It's what UAF always were, and it's what Stand Up to Racism are. Stand Up to Racism are, in effect, an organization which is run in cooperation with the British state. And UAF were as well. Don't believe me? Go and read UAF's founding statement. Look who signed it. It was signed by David Cameron just before he became Prime Minister. David Cameron, who, of course, ran the proxy war on Libya using an armed force of actual fascistic jihadist mercenaries, and also the war on Syria, using roughly the same groups of people. And yet he was signing up to UAF's founding statement opposing the bad fascists. You see what the joke is yet? You see why reducing fascism to questions of language and aesthetics is an utterly, utterly empty way of doing politics. Right. Going to have to go and get some water, so please excuse me for 5 minutes. Right, so back again. Thanks everybody for bearing with me. So, to go back to the point about these supposedly anti-fascist organizations, one should always, as a Marxist, learn to distinguish between form and content. Just because something calls itself an anti-fascist organization and takes on the different elements of such organizations that have appeared in the past doesn't necessarily mean that it is. So, classic example being so-called Antifa type organizations. Now, the anti-fascist squads that were once formed by the KPD in early 1930s Germany, or in the immediate aftermath of the of World War II. This is a classic example of their reappearance in the 2000s, and certainly in the sort of post-Trump era, as something that would be like picked up by the bourgeoisie and turned into its opposite. Far from being militant expressions of working class power, they became essentially state-aligned groups that were manipulated by, like, the FBI and other law enforcement organizations, and would be arranged to, shall we say, appear next to Proud Boys, etc., to sort of stage fake fights, essentially, in a kind of the permanent strategy of tension, which the US is always engaging in and waging upon its own population. So just because something has got the old anti-fascist flag, or maybe it's painted in trans colors, just because it calls itself anti-fascist, etc., doesn't mean it necessarily is. Look at the class content of it, look at the program, look at its actions. Is it something which is actually trying to engage seriously in mobilizing the working class, or is it something which is just a bunch of lumpens running around and being manipulated by the state? Probably the latter in most cases. Now, one of the things that Dmitrov said in his classic work on the subject is that there needs to be, of course, a clear program which has a clear class content, and that is not something which is present in most of these organizations that you find floating around now. What you found, and again, let's use an example outside the Anglo world. Let's use the French left as an example. When the French left was faced with the choice of either maintaining their independence or collaborating with Emmanuel Macron against Le Pen and Rassemblement National, the French left, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, France's answer to Jeremy Corbyn, make of that what you will. Maybe he makes, particularly bland croissants or something. The French left chose to collaborate with Macron. Why is the interesting question. What is it about Macron that distinguishes him from Le Pen, other than the fact that Le Pen's father was, of course, a notoriously open fascist? What is it about the program of Emmanuel Macron which distinguishes him as worthy of support against the apparent coming tyranny of Marine Le Pen? Given that Emmanuel Macron has been using the forces of the French state to try to smash working class organization in an incredibly violent way, the repression that has been unleashed by the French state against the French working class over the last 8 years now has been even more violent than that which has been unleashed by the British ruling class so far. If you look at the way that the Yellow Vest protests were suppressed and the number of people killed by the French police in that, how could Marine Le Pen have done a better job for the French bourgeoisie than Emmanuel Macron did? Not just that, but the pension strikes, the various different uprisings in the suburbs known as the banlieue in France, all met with an extreme amount of violence from the French police, French militarized police, the CRS riot police. Again, how could Marine Le Pen have delivered any differently to that which Emmanuel Macron delivered for the French bourgeoisie? And yet, because of the questions of aesthetics, basically, because Le Pen is prepared, maybe less so than her father, perhaps, is still prepared to stand within that fascistic tradition. She is considered to be beyond the pale, whereas Macron is considered to be worthy of collaboration with, because he'll occasionally mouth words about standing against fascism, despite, even by French, the admission of French bourgeois analysts, adopting many of the positions of Marine Le Pen since 2017. This is the farce of so-called anti-fascism. This is the fraud that is Jean-Luc Mélenchon and Jeremy Corbyn, by the way. So, because the definition of anti-fascism now has been completely drained of any proletarian content. And here we go back to the need for an anti-fascism that is actually based on proletarian content. You see, what you need is a program to address the urgent needs of the working class. And that is not something that is going to be picked up by any of the bourgeois parties. And I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be picked up by St. Jeremy of Islington's new party either. So you need stuff about employment, housing, health services, infrastructure, transportation, and also democratic and civil rights. The defense of the bourgeois democratic rights that used to be taken for granted, which have been taken away by the bourgeois state over a period of 20 plus years now. That a widespread enthusiastic defense of those needs to be waged. And that all should be part of a common program of action against fascism. Now, some of the groups involved in official anti-fascism will say that they stand for those things, but in practice, what they stand for is screaming, that's racist, and that's it. And occasionally, like I've been to these protests, you hear people chanting about higher taxes on the rich, but that's never fleshed out. Occasionally, you'll see a group of people like surround an identified reactionary and scream at them. It might be cathartic for 5 minutes, but it achieves absolutely nothing. Like, these organizations achieve nothing of any substance. They're just traps that people fall into. And I understand why people do. Look, we've all been part of shit organizations. The difference is that at least some of us have come to understand that they are organizations that are ultimately controlled by the state, and have identified the need to get out of them. So we need to remember that being anti-fascist is something which should be a proletarian position. But at the moment, anti-fascism is just a buzzword used by the bourgeois, a tabooed term used by the bourgeois to essentially try and scare people in various different directions. And until we give anti-fascism its proletarian content back again, it's not going to be able to mobilize the working class in any significant way around the anti-fascist slogan, because at the moment, anti-fascism is just a project that's attached to like the more liberal end of the bourgeoisie, which can mobilize precisely nobody, or very few anyway. So we'll leave it there for now and go back and take questions. Somebody raised the question of always interesting question of Jim Jones earlier on. Interesting, former friend of or political ally of Dianne Feinstein in California. Of course, notoriously killed himself and a whole bunch of his followers in a bizarre incident in Guyana in I believe it was the very early 1980s. Now, if you start digging into Jones, you'll find that he was pretty clearly an asset of the American intelligence services, and had been for a very long time. He'd been working with them and being allowed to do various different projects, which nobody without license being given to him from the state would have been allowed to do so. He was very much interested in, shall we say, MK Ultra aligned kind of experiments. He was very much interested in what you would call now brainwashing methods. He had been to areas like over the world, like Brazil, when the US was deploying assets there to prepare the ground for the military coup of 1965. And even the place he ultimately set up his so-called commune and led the apparent mass suicide, though I would say it was more likely to be, it was more accurately should be described as mass murder. Guyana itself was, of course, subject to huge CIA and MI6 subversion operations. And the area where they set up that compound was a former area where I believe it was like one of the big American chemical corporations had been extracting resources from around there. So the whole thing from Jones himself to the area where he set this up was linked to like various institutions of the American ruling class. And yet he's been sold as like some kind of like renegade socialist or something. Now, whatever Jones thought he was doing, I don't know. I don't have access to the internal thoughts of the man, and haven't researched it quite enough to be able to deliver anything definitive on this. But Jones, I think it's pretty clear, was an asset of the American security services, and the operation he was running was pretty much like one of those fake organizations that is designed to discredit potentially radical organizations inside the United States or wider Latin America. And that's why he was allowed to do the things that he did for so long. He was given license to do all these things. Just the same way a lot of like these cult type organizations are given license to do stuff because they're being used for various different operations by the US intelligence services. There was also the question of a certain Mr. Caleb Maupin, who has been dressing like a big tent revivalist preacher recently. The only thing I'll say about him is that, well, he's not a stupid man, but he is a vain man. And he is a man who thinks that he is entitled to lead things. And that's very dangerous, because if you think that you are entitled to lead mass movements and mass movements don't appear, then you succumb to frustration and you succumb often to opportunism. And I think that Maupin's abandonment of Marxism-Leninism and his newly made up concept of so-called innovationism shows what happens when you believe yourself to be the great leader of the working class and the working class won't follow you. You fall into opportunism, which is where he is now. And that's why he has opportunistically aligned himself with Donald Trump. And that is why that he continues, as far as I can see, to defend Donald Trump, unable to reckon with the consequences of his own failed analysis. So I'll leave my comments on him there. He's not a Marxist anymore. He's declared himself to be something new. He appears to be leading now some kind of cult. So as far as I'm concerned, he's no longer really worthy of any attention. So let's move on then to other questions. We have a Pinochet devotee in the chat. Hello to Greg Thompson. When you get tired of choking on the balls of the bourgeoisie, do let me know. It's always entertaining when we get some sort of fascist apologist in the chat shouting about helicopters and communists. It's always, you fascists are always amusing fellows. All of this posturing, all of this sort of violent threats and macho nonsense. And you can't get away with this because everybody knows that you're just sad little bitches for the ruling class. You're just a boot boy for monopoly capitalism. You're just doing violence on behalf of the giant hedge funds of the world, like BlackRock and the Vanguard Group. I hope the work is very well rewarded, because you have sold yourself to Larry Fink and others for, well, I hope it's more than pennies, because to humiliate yourself by being a mercenary for big capital these days is to hitch yourself up to a dying and decaying system. So you can babble about helicopter rides and kill the commies and all that shit and busy yourself with the frenetic visions of violence and apocalypticism that the fascist ideologues put in your minds. But essentially, all you are is BlackRock's boy. Enjoy it. Okay. So who have we got here? Hello to Jonas and Sid and JR and KH. Oh, up the road in Aberdeen. Hello to you. Hello to Jerry, Albert, Sputnik 56, Caustic Grip. Hello to Char Paul and Mo 1917. Tom Wolf says Paul Mason has just given an interview comparing Corbyn to Hitler. Strange even by his standards. Well, Mason's a rather unhinged figure these days, even more so than usual, and than he used to be. He's just basically running around desperately shilling for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. I mean, he's kind of like he's kind of painted himself into a corner now. If he'd have been more subtle about it, he would have done what Owen Jones has done, which is immediately declared that he backs Corbyn's new party, then immediately declared that Corbyn's new party should merge with the Greens. I hope they do, because that'll reveal that the project is as useless and impotent as everybody knows it's going to be. Yes, and if you look at the picture of Owen Jones these days when he's doing his live streams, there is a man who is on some, shall we say, very interesting medication. Right. Right. Who else we got? Hello to Rob and Beans. Hello to Daniel. Hello to Marius. Right. Who else we got here? Spacolos on Twitch. And Mogman Dog and TG Wilson. And Mr. Xavier, who says, what do you think of Lee Kuan Yew? Is he someone that leaders of developing countries should emulate? I see a lot of hype surrounding him. Now, Lee Kuan Yew was the leader of Singapore. Oh, our fascist friend is back. How many millions did communism kill? But that wasn't real communism, was it? That's funny. You start off by babbling about helicopter rides and, of course, imitating the methods of the Pinochet regime and others in Operation Condor, which killed many, many thousands of people. Then you go on about communism killing millions. So what is your claim here? Are you claiming to defend, like Joseph Borrell, the great Western civilization, which came into the world by wiping out hundreds of thousands inside the what are now the imperial core countries, then hundreds of millions across the world? How many had to die for the project that you carry water for? How many had to die to birth capitalism? How many had to die to bring imperialism into the world? Do you even know? Do you even care? Do you even think about any of these things? Or are you just sort of rifling through the black book of communism or some book by Robert Conquest, desperately finding it? You've already revealed that you like to engage in extremely violent rhetoric. So you're clearly not opposed to mass violence and mass slaughter. Tell me, are you a fan of the Austrian watercolor artist? Are you a fan of Signor Mussolini? Are you a fan of Francisco Franco or the Salazar regime, all of which were extremely violent, murderous states and organizations? And yet you want to come here and lecture us on the largely fictional work done by the Black Book of Communism. So make up your mind. What is it, Mr. Fascist? Are you a violent crusader wielding the sword of Western civilization against the barbaric Bolshevik hordes? Are you prepared to kill millions yourself in defense of private property? Or can you not actually justify anything you're saying? You're just jumping between different talking points. Or are you actually a bot farm in India being paid for by Israel? Answers, please, in the chat. Do please keep entertaining us. But to return to the question of Lee Kuan Yew, founder of Singapore, well, he was in a very unique situation because Singapore, of course, used to be attached to the old British colony of Malaya. They were one country for a while, and Singapore went its own way. Singapore, because of its unique trading position, being a port and an investment center, was in a very strong position to bargain with the different imperialist powers and to pursue a sort of semi-independent line of development. And this is why it has, these days, had decent relations with the People's Republic of China and still has relations with the United States, because whatever else Lee Kuan Yu was, he was an effective politician. He was able to effectively bargain with the various different power blocks to establish the city-state of Singapore as a regional player in its own right. But again, like, that was a very unique situation, whereby, of course, he was aligned with the British, but also drove something of a hard bargain with the British and the Americans. So interesting figure, worthy of study, but also not somebody who can be easily imitated, given the uniqueness of Singapore. Is Farage a fascist? No, Nigel Farage is a liberal, to answer Seamus's question. Nigel Farage is barely any different to the leaders of the Conservative Party or Keir Starmer. Right. Why are you acknowledge the reality of far-right Islamofascism being a thing? Asks Blue Crusader. Oh, you corrected. Why are you not acknowledging the reality of far-right Islamofascism being a thing? Well, why don't you tell me, Blue Crusader, if indeed that is your real name, what do you consider Islamofascism to be? Because there are fascistic groups that are employed by British imperialism to destroy nations like Libya and Syria. Are you referring to those? Are you referring to HTS, which is currently a comprador fascistic regime in Syria, which is terrorizing the religious and ethnic minorities there? Are you referring to that? Please put your answer in the comments, Blue Crusader. I do want to know what you think. So, okay. David King says Starmer is fascist, wants militarization. No, Starmer's a liberal. I think, David, you've fallen into the trap of using the fascist term as a pejorative. The political establishment in Britain is still solidly liberal. They haven't gone to the point where they need fascism yet. Yet liberals have always been, historically speaking, prone to wild authoritarianism to defend the rule of private property. Remember, liberalism and all the rights it talks about in its founding philosophical texts principally meant those rights to apply only to the bourgeoisie. And that's what, of course, in times of reaction and crisis, everything returns to its essence. And liberalism's essence is the philosophical system of the bourgeoisie, meaning the rights and the privileges that they say that citizens should have, and indeed the very concept of citizenship itself is something which the liberal philosophers like John Locke thought should only really apply to the bourgeoisie. And so fundamentally, you don't need to be a fascist to be a wild anti-authoritarian who's militantly anti-working class. So Albert says MI5 helped Franco with the logistics of moving Moroccans to fight with the fascists. I don't doubt that that's true. I mean, the British state was aiding the Francoists under the table all the time. Why do you think that Vladimir Putin has such an aversion to Russia's Soviet legacy, despite when he's clearly the beneficiary of it? Asks Slumbering Colossus. Well, I would say, to answer Slumbering Colossus's point, he's much less hostile to it these days. Bear in mind, his political starting point was the sort of Yeltsin 90s, and he came to power as the compromise candidate between various different factions, some of which were pro the Soviet legacy, some of which were anti. But he's moved more and more towards embracing the Soviet legacy to a certain extent as the pressure on Russia from the imperialists has grown, and they've needed to find things to unify the population around, and have found that the only thing that truly works properly is the Soviet legacy, not the Tsarist legacy. Looking through. Right, so Blue Crusader hasn't answered the question. So I'll repeat it again. I've defined what is fascism, or what is a sort of Islamic-based fascist grouping, and they're the ones who were employed by the British and the American states. And that's not speculation, that's provable. Go and read the book by Max Blumenthal. Again, if indeed you are a real person, not just a troll, or a bot. Excuse me. Sid says, interestingly enough, the KKK began to appear in southern West Virginia in 1924, right after the United Mine Workers had been organizing in the fields and bringing the workers together. Yeah. Whenever there's any success of uniting the proletariat, the bourgeoisie always funds ultra-reactionary groups to appear and terrorize the working class and divide them again. Marius says, the bourgeoisie quietly cooperates and enables the lumpen as a weapon against the workers. Under normal capitalist democracy. In fascism, the lumpen openly become an arm of the state. Very true. Hello to Leslie Smith, and yes, I'll try to keep up the good work. Irish Partisan says, the Stat Chilo coalition in Czechia, which is led by the Communist Party, is hovering between 12 to 25% in the opinion polls ahead of the general elections this autumn. This prompted the Czech government to move to ban the Communist Party of Bohemia and Moravia. Yep, and it's a sign of profound weakness that the Czech bourgeois have gone for that. If they were in any way confident, they would run the election without the need to go for such action. The fact that they've had to do it tells you that they're that maybe what Irish Partisan mentions, this coalition is probably polling higher than is acknowledged. And so I would see it perversely in some ways as a positive thing, that the fact that the Czech bourgeois felt the need to do that. If they didn't feel some kind of threat, they wouldn't be doing it. It's not just paranoia. It's not just madness. They clearly feel like their authority is drained. The authority of the bourgeois parties in the Czech Republic is draining away. And so it's an interesting move. We'll see if the Czech communists can counter it. Just going down here. Marius says the CPUSA and PSL are egregious offenders. They use the threat of fascism as an excuse to be hysterical liberals. They both have used the supposed threat of imminent fascism in the United States to push people always back towards the Democratic Party. That's the way they do this. That's the way they do business, basically. Daniel says, just look at the stand-up to racism in Britain. They'll happily go after the Reform and the Tories, but nowhere near the same with Labour. Yes, very true. I mean, sometimes they don't even go after the Tories. They go after, Farage and co. But the racist record of the Labour Party is never explored. Never explored. Antifa is the police, says Sid, so that's definitely not an anti-fascist organization. Very true. Sid says anti-fascist organizations these days have no real problem with someone being a reactionary and a fascist. They just don't want those sentiments verbalized. That's true. Isn't the BNP still run by the Strasserist Nick Griffin? Probably. It's consisted of about 5 guys and a dog these days. Not very much of an organization left now. Oh, we have a Stephen Yaxley Lennon fan in the chat. I hope that the checks from Israel, from the Israeli government, have cleared. And if that's your idol, then quite frankly, you have no brain. If this fucking coked up dickhead is your idol, who, by the way, has been at various points in his career surrounded by fucking sex offenders, if that's your idol, then the British state has clearly cut off the top of your head, stuck an ice cream scoop inside, and hauled out what few brain cells you possessed. Because if that's your fucking idol, you're a fucking idiot. And I'm just going to call you a fucking idiot because that's the only thing that's possible to conclude about you. Thank you and good night. Greg's back. He says, if Alexander gets his communist utopia, he won't be wearing Adidas, he'll be wearing a potato sack. Well, again, like, you're just cycling through the cliches, aren't you? Every major communist country has drastically improved the living standards of the working class and the peasantry. And if you knew anything about communist countries, you'll know that they have a very good line in sportswear. So basically, Greg, you don't know anything. You just, like, the BBC just, there's a tube coming out of your fucking television spouting bullshit, and you're happily drinking it down. I bet you're the kind of guy who would claim that he wouldn't believe anything that the CNN or the fake news says, unless it comes to communism, in which case then you'll believe everything they say. You'll believe everything the academics who you probably purport to hate say. Unless, of course, you are an academic. Please tell us if you are. Don't worry, we won't rat you out. We don't rat people out here, even fascists. But I'm not banning you because you're very entertaining, because you're just going through all of the cliched pieces of bullshit of anti-communism. Because I can go through and I can prove to you that in every single communist revolution, the actual living standards of the great majority of the population went up drastically. So this is nonsense. The collapse in living standards came after the counter-revolution and the restoration of capitalism, which you love so much. So again, fail. Keep it coming, Greg. Keep it coming. Sid says, some chap from Manchester that I knew 20 years ago thought Tommy Robinson was admirable. Well, there's a lot of bad cocaine that was done in Manchester over the past 20 years. That's probably the reason for it. Right. So, like, the problem with the problem with a lot of these anti-communists is that they often entertain themselves by arguing with liberal hysterics who just start screaming about racism. They can't handle actual arguments at all, but that shouldn't be a surprise. Well, to answer Walter's point about Adidas being founded by a fascist, well, in the coming revolution, Adidas will be nationalized and will be fully run by well-paid workers in garment manufacturing concerns in the West again, and not made in sweatshops. So Adidas is the garment of the working class of the east of Europe and the West, and we will continue to wear it. I absolutely fucking refuse to go down the line of saying that there's a fucking uniform for Marxists. It's like, no, there isn't. Anybody who thinks that, like, there is like a uniform, that a particular set of clothing which makes you revolutionary is a fucking moron. It is an absolute fucking moron. It's the absolute, like, fetishization of revolutionary politics, which has been so detrimental to us over the last 50 to 60 years. Greg's back. Ask any Eastern European what they think about communism. Well, which Eastern Europeans have you been asking, Greg? Well, you might want to ask the ones who lost their jobs due to deindustrialization, or the ones who lost their pensions due to the systematic robbery of state funds by the foul oligarchies that grew there. Ask Russians who consistently vote Joseph Stalin to be the greatest leader of Russia over the last 500 years. See, I can play this game all fucking day, and you'll still lose, Greg. I'm never banning you, by the way. You're very special. I hope you tune in every single week, every single night, in fact. Volt X says, I am Marxist from London, England. Okay, good. And by the way, Mr. Stephen Yaxley Lennon, he might do work for Israel, but his principal allegiance is, of course, MI5. It's the British Security Services. That's who he does his work for. Yes, Israel benefits from his work, but principally he's a British state employee. Ayman Puedama says, don't you think that mass immigration benefits the corporations? Well, under capitalism, mass immigration or any immigration is the immigration regimes are constructed to benefit capital. That's true. The question isn't that. The question is, what do you do about it? Do you, whilst trying to maintain capitalism, claim that the various different restrictions and militaristic responses to migration are going to be able to benefit the working class? Is it the case that you think that policies like imprisonment and mass deportation of migrants? And by the way, I noticed. I mean, I happened to go past the UKIP crowd in Glasgow the other day, and some of them were pretty fucking clear that they wanted all the migrants out. Now, there is always the question of, well, where do you stop there? I think for some of them, it was basically anybody who wasn't white. But for others, it'll be different. But can an immigration regime be constructed under this stage of decaying monopoly capitalism, which is going to benefit the working class? Or will all the politics related to restrictions on immigration only ever be used to further division within the working class and benefit the ruling class? The answer is the latter. The answer is that all the immigration question is only ever used by bourgeois politicians in a deeply cynical way. And this includes Farage, by the way, and it includes the actor Stephen Yaxley Lennon. That it is used to divide working class people from each other. That is what it's used for. And yes, the immigration regimes constructed by the bourgeois governments in this country are designed to do two things. One, to secure hyper-exploitable labor for industries that require difficult, dirty, dangerous jobs to be done. And that's why you find so many migrant laborers working in agriculture, for instance, and also to be used as a weapon, to be added to the reserve army of labor. You see, what the capitalist class require in the imperialist countries right now, even if some of them don't understand it, is a bigger and bigger reserve army of labor that can be used as a threat to the currently existing working class, those who are actually in work, to keep them disciplined and keep them from protesting when their wages are inevitably cut to the bone. And they require a large reserve army of labor to do this. And if that reserve army of labor can be consisting of multiple different ethnicities, all of whom can be encouraged to hate each other, then that's even better for the working class. That's even better for the ruling class. because if you've got a reserve army of labor, which the pre-existing working class is already divided from and encouraged to hate, then class unity against the ruling class is even more difficult to achieve. You see, this is the problem. Anybody who claims to be some kind of leftist and engages in this bidding war of repression and division over the immigration question and doesn't focus on how to unify the entire working class against capital is engaging in the process of dividing the class. See, what's needed to be done is to expose the little game or the big game that the capitalists are playing with the immigration question, and to put forward a common program of action to address the needs of the entire working class. Not to, as Mr. Galloway has done, claim that he's got the solution to stop the butts, or as the various other left-wingers have done throughout Europe, capitulate to the demands of ultra-reactionary parties and claim that they've got some sort of plan that will reverse migration. Migration won't stop because the demand for labor, for the labor of these migrants inside the imperial core countries, doesn't stop. I will go back to the example of Giorgia Meloni, who comes in saying, I will defend Italy against the invading migrant hordes. Then within a few months is saying, well, it turns out we need those hordes for work in Italian industry. Because that's what you'd get from Nigel Farage as well. It's what you'd get from Stephen Yaxley Lennon if they allowed that coked up little knobhead to be prime minister. Who knows? The British bourgeoisie might put him in charge yet. So the demand for the labor of these people is there, so they will keep coming. And also the destabilization of their countries of origin keeps occurring, done by imperialism, so they will keep moving. So unless your politics are a politics which is focused upon the need to destroy imperialism and essentially for the working class to take power in this country in order to bring about the end of British imperialism and rebuild the country as, at first, a non-imperialist workers' state, then nothing else you say is worth anything. And you will, if your focus is just on the immigration question, you're spending all your time talking about that, all you're doing is, again, making sure that the work of the ruling class is done in dividing the working class, and making sure that essentially you're still playing the game of the ruling class. That's my point. Right. Okay. So, oh, good. Greg's still with us. There is no such thing as equality, says Greg. It's all fate, commie utopia. People not equal, never will be. Well, what do we mean by equal? What do we mean by equal? What we mean by human equality is that all human life is fundamentally has the same value. That all human beings are capable of developing themselves to the point where they can make huge contributions to the future of our species, the human species. That capitalism squanders human potential, which it does. How many people do we all know who could have made like huge contributions towards the productivity of industry, towards discoveries in science and technology or art and culture, whose talents go untapped due to the fact that capitalism pushes them into a low-wage job, then keeps them there and doesn't allow them to develop properly? How many people do we know like that? I bet between us we know thousands, because it happens to millions upon millions of workers across the Western world. Capitalism is a giant waste of human potential. Communism, or should we say, the establishment of a workers' state and then the move to socialism and then the move to the higher stage, which is communism, is about unlocking that potential within every human being. It is, and that potential, and if we could unlock that potential, which only a state organized and run by the working class could do, how much better would this country, indeed every country, be? That is the point. It's not about that every human being suddenly becomes equal. This is not Thomas More's utopia. This is not a religious utopia where everyone wears sacks and he sits around eating porridge. It Thomas More's Utopia is a fascinating book, and I would encourage you, Greg, as a proud Englishman, to read it, as it is part of the intellectual history of the English nation. But the communism that we are seeking to bring about is not about that. It is about realizing the true potential of the human species, which is vast and untapped. Capitalism opens up certain potential, the potential for the realization of some of this, but shuts the door on it because of its crisis-riddled and class-based nature. Only communism can see the true full development of the human species, free of the divisions of, free of the fake divisions of race, of ethnicity, of religion, and sex. Only once humanity in every nation is organized and unified with the working class constituted of the ruling class can we start to fully realize human potential. What we are witnessing right now is the giant squandering of human capital. That is what imperialism in its late stage is doing. So, he said, you know what? I'm going to keep the anti-communists in the chat from now on. Particularly, not the out and out trolls and the knobheads, but those who make interesting comments. You are welcome to stay and keep chiming in. Greg, I do hope you come back again in the future. So, right. Okay, so we are getting on towards 21:25. So with the voice the way that it is tonight and the fact that I keep coughing, I'm going to draw things to a close for today. Thanks to all 461 of you watching. That's great on a Sunday night. Good to have you all with us. I will be back again, hopefully with you tomorrow for a rundown of the latest from the Russia-Ukraine, or in reality, Russia-NATO war. And Decline and Fall will return this week. We had to have some time off last week due to the fact that I was off coughing my guts up, as you can see from tonight's broadcast. But we will be returning this coming week. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Couldn't do it without you. And I will now throw you back to the video outro.
Утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.